Hi there, welcome to another episode of How To with Herman, the place to get your project management tips and techniques. Okay, so today we will look at the main process groups in a project and to understand why they are there and what we need to do in these main process groups. Right, so without further ado, let's jump into the 5 main process groups of a project. Okay then, so let's have a look at the main project process groups that you find in every project. So the first thing is that there are 5 process groups. So every project has 5 process groups, and you will find these process groups actually in every project. Doesn't matter if it's a big project or a small project. Normally there are these 5 process groups that you will find within the project. Some projects or some companies have more processes that they added on, but these are the 5 main processes. So what are these processes that we are talking about? Basically, here they are. So the 5 processes are initiating, an initiating process. Number 2, a planning process. Number 3, an executing process. Number 4, a monitoring and controlling process. And then number 5, a closing process. So as I've mentioned, each and every project has these 5 processes. So let's dive a little bit more into each of these processes and try to understand what the process is about, what happens in the process, and also what is the main outcome of each of these processes. Okay, so first things first. The project needs to start someplace because a project doesn't fall out of the air and there it is. So firstly, we start with initiating the project. That is basically where we start everything that we need to do in the project. So the main things that happens here, or the main outcomes of this specific process, is the following. So firstly, this is normally where the charter of the project is being written. So remember, you are in the beginning of the project. So we need to write down what are we going to do in the project. And this is where the charter, the project charter, basically is being written. The charter is a high-level document outlining what the project needs to do or what the outcomes are. Then also we look at identifying all our major stakeholders on the project. And that we do in the beginning of the project because we need to understand who the main stakeholders are, how we need to manage them, and how we are going to interact with these stakeholders on the project. Normally, this is where the project manager is appointed as well. So it's a good idea and good practice to appoint your project manager as early as possible in your project. And then also what is important is we do a feasibility study. So we look at how feasible this specific project is. Can we actually do the project now? Do we have the capacity? Is our company geared to do it? So that is our feasibility study. And then lastly, we look at the project benefits. So what are the benefits that we want out of this project once it is done? So we decide that up front, and then it will start making sense to us if the project is feasible or not at the end of the day. So those are some of the things that are happening in the initiating stage of the project. Now, the major outcome of initiating is a go or no-go decision that needs to be made. So in other words, once we've done our feasibility study, we looked at the charter and the benefits, we need to decide, is this project feasible? Can we go with the project, or is it a no-go and it's not feasible? So if it's a no-go, obviously the project will be stopped right there. But if the decision is, yes, this is feasible, we can do it now, we are going to make some money out of this, then a go decision is then made. And then we move on to the next process group. Okay, so then we've done the initiating of the project, and then we start going over into the planning of the project. Okay, so initiating is done, we have our go decision, now we need to start planning the project. So what are the major things that we look at during planning? So firstly here, we plan the project. You cannot do a project if you haven't planned it in detail. So what we do is we plan the 10 knowledge areas in detail. Now the 10 knowledge areas are basically the following: your scope, your schedule. Okay, so scoping is basically what needs to be done in the project. What are we going to do? What are we not going to do in the project? Your schedule is basically your timeline. Everything in a project runs according to a schedule or a time that has been allocated to it. So we plan the schedule in detail because we have a definite start date and a definite end date, and the schedule is planned accordingly. Then we start looking at the cost of the project. So what is the cost? How much money do we need? Where are we going to get the money? When do we need to spend the money on the project? And so forth. Right, and then we look at the resources as well. So what material resources, what human resources do we need on the project? And we plan how we are going to utilize these resources and when the resources needs to flow into the project. Where are we going to get the resources? How are we going to pay them? When are we going to release them? All of these things we then plan in detail. Right, the next one here is quality. So what quality criteria is required on the project, and how are we going to check the quality of the project, that it's up to a certain standard as our client required. Then also we look at communication. So what is the communication plan of our project? How are we going to communicate? What mediums are we going to use? Is it going to be WhatsApp? Is it going to be direct communication through meetings? How are we going to communicate? And with all these resources that we have in the project, communication is really, really important. And we need to make sure that we have a sound communication plan, that everyone knows what the communication channels are, how to communicate, when to communicate, what to communicate, and in what format to do that. Then we go over to risk management and our risk plan. So every project carries some risk. Some carry more than others. But in essence, a project is a change intervention. So there's always risk of something going wrong in the project. And that's why we do a risk assessment. So we plan our risk in detail. We do a risk assessment for the project, that we can come up with mitigation plans, or plans that if something goes wrong, that we have a plan B or a plan C in our pockets. And we do a detailed risk analysis and a risk plan. Then we start looking at procurement as well. So procurement is basically what are we going to buy or manufacture on the project, and what do we need in order to make this project happen at the end of the day. So we set up a procurement plan. We make sure that everything is procured for the project in the correct manner, and that it flows into the project when needed. Then we look at our stakeholders and our stakeholder engagement. So during initiating, we identify all our stakeholders on the project, and now we need to come up with a plan on how to manage these stakeholders and how to engage them. Because stakeholders are really important people and organizations on your project, and you need to make sure that you manage them correctly. And then lastly, but actually this normally comes first, but I've put it lastly here because after we've done all of these things that I've just talked about, we need to integrate all of our 10 knowledge areas into one coherent project plan. So that is the integration. And that is the main role of the project manager as well, is to integrate all these different management plans into one project management plan that can be actually executed at the end of the day, and that makes sense, and that are within our constraints or parameters that our client has put down in the beginning. So the integration of all our resources and cost and communication and quality and risk then needs to take place, and that then brings us to a workable project plan. And that is also the main outcome of this specific process. Let's move on to the next one. So that is basically your planning. So once it is done, you have a workable project plan that's signed off by your major stakeholders. Right here, next one. So now we start doing the executing of the project. Right, so what do we do here? This is where the work of the project actually takes place according to the plan that we've just made. So we take the plan and now we execute it. And this is where all the resources flows into the project, and we need to manage all these resources. So that is material resources or human resources or both of them. Right, so that is the main thing during executing. We take the plan and now we need to make it work. And it doesn't really matter if you build a building or design a website or your project is organizing a marriage for someone or whatever the case might be. This is where things needs to happen, and everything needs to come together in the executing phase of the project. So in other words, the main outcome is that your project outcomes and benefits are realized here. Okay, so if you look at the building there on the little picture, or on the picture there on the left hand side, this is where the building needs to be built. And the planning has been done. We need to execute, and we need to do now. Right here. So that's execution. So let's look at the next major process group. The next major process group is actually two different processes put together. And there you have it, the monitoring and controlling of the project. When a project is being done, we actually look at two different areas here. So this is what we do here. Firstly, we check that everything is done correctly. Right, so that is your monitoring function. We check that if we do the project, that everything is done according to the plan and done correctly, according to the quality requirements for the project. And the second part is, if it is not done correctly, then we need to start making changes here. So that's the second part here at the bottom. Right, so the first part is we monitor and we check that everything is done correctly. If everything is done correctly, we sign off and we move on. But if we find that there are problems or there are mistakes or something that was not done correctly or was not done at all, we need to then make changes on the project. And for that, we have a formal change management process where we then take what is done wrong and we replan that and we make sure that it is done the second time correctly. So that's our change management system that we have, and that it forms part of monitoring and controlling in the project. Now, monitoring and controlling is done from the beginning of the project right through to the end. And it's a very important function that needs to be done. And a lot of projects, people slip on this one, the monitoring and controlling part of the project. Because if you don't monitor and control, things will go wrong. Because remember, a project is a change intervention. So with change comes risk, and with risk comes the chance that something might go wrong. And that's why we need to check carefully that what we do on the project is correct, okay, according to how we should do it. And if not, we need to then make changes. Okay, so what's the major outcome of this process? Is to ensure that the project is done correctly. So yes, done correctly according to the plan that we have and according to the requirements of our stakeholders and clients. Okay, so once this is done and everything has been executed in the project, we go over to the last process group, and that is the closing of the project. So the project has basically been done and dusted now. Now we need to close it off correctly. So these are the main things that needs to be done here. We need to close off all the project work. So all the work that we are busy with in executing of the project, we need to close off now. And we need to say, this is now done and dusted. We need to stop now. We've done what we needed to do. Then secondly, very important, we need to get sign off on the project. So our client must come and say, yes, I'm satisfied. I'm going to sign off on the project. You've done what you set out to do, and I will sign off on the project. I am satisfied that you've delivered the project benefits, that you've delivered the project requirements and everything that needed to be done. And then lastly, basically a lessons learned. So what did we learn out of this project, and how can we do it better in the future? So what went right, what went wrong, how can we do it better, and how are we going to tackle it the next time in a different way to make sure that we didn't make so many mistakes in the project, if there were many mistakes made in the process. And then the major outcome of this process is to close the project successfully. Okay, to make sure that everything is done and done correctly, and that you can close off the project and hand it over to your client, and as the project manager, walk away from the project. Okay, so these are the 5 main process groups of the project. And as I've said before, the project goes through all of these and has to go through all of these processes in order to be successfully done.